Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Chat with Matt. I'm glad you're here. And it is finally, I think we're actually into real spring. I think we've had a couple of false springs. We've been lulled into a sense of spring 2 weekends ago with some 80-degree weather. And, a month before that, we had some 70s and 80s, actually a whole week of that. Of 60s and 70s, which was amazing, but then winter came roaring back, and we actually had a freeze, and I guess a freeze on 2 nights ago, and several frosts over the last 7 days. So I know that's one thing that I wanted to talk about because I've been getting a bunch of questions about frost and what that might mean for your plants and whatnot. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Otherwise, today I honestly couldn't decide what to talk about in general because the garden center is absolutely jam-packed with the most beautiful plants you've ever seen. It literally was almost torturous trying to walk around and decide on 10 or 12 things to talk about. There are so many good-looking perennials. Ray and his team in the perennials have done an absolutely outstanding job. The perennial selection this year is second to none. I walked through the greenhouse. I've got a handful of things up here that we'll talk about annual tropical-wise. Sheila and her team in the greenhouse have done an absolutely outstanding job. The greenhouse is bursting at the seams, so honestly, I'm going to need all of you to come in and buy a bunch of flowers and stuff so that we can clear out some space and make a little room because we're busting at the seams with beautiful vegetables and annuals, tropical plants, house plants, all that good stuff is out there. Our tree and shrub selection looks amazing. We, as you probably know, dig and grow most of our own trees. We grow a lot of our own shrubs. We have 140 acres here, so the selection and breadth of choices is very wide. So I'd love for you to come out and see some of that. So I brought up a bunch of stuff. We'll kind of do. I'll just call it, I guess, a bit of a potpourri. There's no real theme to the plant selection or my choices today. So I did want to talk about frost damage, though. As I mentioned 2 nights ago, we had a freeze last. I think Sunday and I believe Monday, we had a frost, I guess a freeze and a frost on a couple of those days. So we've had 3 or 4 frosts in the last week. I believe that we are finally past that. If we look at the 10-day forecast, which gets us out to the, 8th, 9th, whatever of May, there's nothing below about 43 in the 10-day forecast, and the 14-day forecast, which I know is a little suspect, trying to forecast out that far, but that continues back up into the 50s. So overnight lows in the 50s and 60s, except for a couple of nights in the low and mid 40s. So I would say that it is pretty safe to bring houseplants, tropicals, things like that out, especially if they're easy to move back in should there be a cold night. I think you're probably pretty close to being able to plant a lot of your vegetables, although the ground is still a little cool. So I certainly wouldn't be risking it just yet with some of your really warm weather loving plants, your peppers and squashes and things like that. There's no benefit to getting them in early. So I would wait on those at least another week or 10 days. Some of these overnight lows in the 50s and 60s, that helps the soil warm up a lot. When we have these warm days like we've been having where it may go up to 60, 70, whatever degrees during the day, but then at night we're getting into the 30s or 40s, the ground just cools off every night and it just has a hard time really gaining traction in terms of that warming trend. Now that we're going to start to get some 60s and 50s for overnight lows and highs during the day in the 70s and 80s, that's going to get that soil to warm up. So that's when you really want to get your warm weather loving stuff, your sweet potatoes, your peppers, squashes, cucumbers, melons, etc. So wait on those. For sure, wait on basil in the ground, but I think you could put basil outside. If we're going to get temperatures down into the below 50, basil would like to be protected. So just a few tips about that. But in regards to frost damage, I brought these 2 plants up. These are some plants that we've had outside that got a little bit of minor frost damage. First off, I want to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with these plants or the plants that you may have in your own yard that suffered a similar fate. I have a very large magnolia at home that had some fairly significant leaf damage from the frost. So the leaves were coming out just like they were on this smaller Macrophylla hydrangea, and the leaves were all young and tender, and the frost came, it caused these leaves to turn to mush. Most of these are going to get crispy and fall off, and you can see there are plenty of healthy green leaves inside here that were not damaged at all. The branches, the roots, none of that was damaged. This is honestly nothing more than a little bit of aesthetic damage. So yes, it does not look great, but given the warm weather coming and a couple weeks of time, you will never know the difference between this plant and a plant that was maybe kept in an unheated greenhouse where it was not damaged by the frost that came. So I just want to kind of point that out. If you have something at home, same kind of thing. If you've got a healthy plant with some frost damage, I would not be concerned at all. If you are concerned, or it's a plant that you know might take a long time to re-leaf, I'm thinking about something maybe along the lines of a Japanese maple or a ginkgo, or something that if it was fully leafed out or partially leafed out and all of the leaf buds were damaged by the frost, you may want to fertilize with something higher in nitrogen to get that plant to push out a second set of buds, or what we call secondary buds. So a fertilizer that comes to mind is Espoma's urea. It's a 4500 fertilizer. So it's basically all nitrogen. There's nothing else in it in terms of the phosphorus and potash, your major elements in there. There's none of that. So 45% potash or 45% nitrogen. It's like giving the plant a shot of adrenaline. Nitrogen is what produces healthy green leaf growth on a plant. So putting that down in the soil, water that in, that will help push out that secondary set of leaf buds. Or in the case of maybe a spruce like this or something, you know, these little brown tips on here that got a little bit of minor burn, that's going to dry up and fall off, but it will come back out and green up. If you had a photo shoot in your yard, or you're hosting, I don't know, prom pictures or something in a couple weeks, or a, you know, maybe a graduation party coming up, something like that. If you're trying to get things going, yeah, maybe fertilize a little bit, maybe either by hand or with pruning shears, pick off or clean out the brown foliage that might be on there. Otherwise, the plant is going to be perfectly fine. So I hope that that helps. We have had all of our plant material out in the sales yard for weeks now. We had very, very little frost damage, to be honest, because most of our plants, we don't force them in a greenhouse. We let them wake up naturally. So while we had some extra warm weather that caused some early growth on some plants, most of these things are perfectly fine with it, and will be perfectly fine going forward. So that's just a little bit about that. Let's talk about the fun stuff. Let's talk about some plant material. I wanted to talk first about just a few annual plants that came to mind. Actually, I guess those are perennial, but I was walking through the greenhouse and a couple of things caught my attention. The first are these three flower bulbs right here. So every year in the spring, we get a ton of people that come in and ask for tulips, ask for daffodils, things like that. And for the longest time, we always told people the same thing, which is come back in the fall. We sell our tulips, our daffodils, etc., in a bag, loose, dried bulbs in the fall, plant them, they'll come back in the spring, they'll bloom, and they'll do their thing. But not everybody came back in the fall, or people forgot. And so we came up with this idea of forcing our bulbs in a pot. So put them in a pot, put them in soil, put them in a refrigerator for the winter, basically. And then in the springtime, they wake up just like your tulips at home. So depending upon the variety of tulip, there's early, mid, and late blooming tulips. So depending upon which variety you have, they might be already up in full bloom. They might be partially budded like this, or they might be a later tulip and might still be a couple weeks away, but they're going to bloom like normal. So these are great for getting that early color. And if you forgot to plant your bulbs in the fall, you can buy these little pots. They are perennial, just like any other flower bulb. So these will come back next year. So you can enjoy them this year and enjoy them in the years to come. So that's just kind of a fun thing. And I know that, you know, a lot of times people just forget to get those bulbs in the ground. So it's kind of a fun way to enjoy those. This is a petunia here called Sweet Susie Storm. or a sweet Tunia called Susie Storm. This has been one of my favorites for the last couple of years. We've been growing this now for, I don't know, 5 years or so. This is one of the most heavy flowering varieties that I've come across. I love the two-tone of this particular flower. So it's got kind of that deep red inside with a really kind of hot pink outside. Really striking color, very vibrant. The Sweet Tunia series is heavy blooming, easy to grow, relatively self-cleaning, meaning you don't have to necessarily deadhead it, although petunias always look better when you do. So this one only gets about 6 or 8 inches high and forms a really tight mound. It's not a trailing, it's not going to run all over. It's not a draping one, so it won't hang down the side of a pot, but really nice all by itself in a container. It's a beautiful hanging basket plant. It blooms like crazy, and as most petunias do, it likes Jack's petunia feed. So that's what we like to use on these to keep them blooming all summer long. I also grabbed one of my favorite plants the last couple of years. If you've ever watched any of my videos, know that I'm a big hummingbird fan and love to plant things that attract hummingbirds. This should be something that is right in the top of your list. This is a Kufia called Vermillion. So this one came from Proven Winners. And I've tried a few different Kufias. They also go by the name of firecracker plant. This one called Vermillion has been the best performing one that I've grown, and I have tried a few of the different varieties out there. Last year, by the end of the year, it formed a tight mound about 18 inches wide and tall, and I would say at any given point during the summer and fall, it probably had a couple hundred flowers on it. So very, very heavy blooming variety, little tubular, orangey flowers with sometimes just a hint of pink to them. But really cool plant. Hummingbirds absolutely love it. So give Vermillion a shot. It's a full sun plant. Also out in the greenhouse, another favorite of mine that we're just really looking particularly good this year. This is a plant that we get from Monrovia growers. It is a tropical plant called Royal Cape Plumbago. This is an all-season bloomer, so this will bloom with these really nice pure blue flowers. They start blooming right now. They basically bloom all season long, so they will bloom until we get a hard frost. It's a tropical plant. If you plant it in the ground, it's going to die when we get a hard frost. If you want to bring it in for the winter, you can. My mother-in-law and father-in-law have a Royal Cape Plumbago that they've had for, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 years now. It gets brought in every winter, and it's in a very large pot now, probably this big around, maybe 20 inches across. And it just blooms like crazy. Every couple of years, they cut it back hard, and it just grows right back, blooms really nicely. But I would say this is another one that at any given time you're having, hundreds of clusters of flowers on here. You can see buds all over the top of the plant. So really going to be a nice, heavy blooming plant. This is another one that would take full sun. So full sun for the Plumbagos. All right. I brought up more than a handful of perennial plants to discuss. And there is no rhyme or reason to these. I just brought up some of my favorites. Again, it was very difficult to decide, but mostly what I wanted to do is maybe try to introduce you to some plants that you might be unfamiliar with. This is a Heartleaf Bergia. This particular one is got these beautiful pink flowers. It's got these large, glossy, almost waxy leaves. The plant, this is basically as tall as it gets. It only gets about 12 or 18 inches tall at the most, maybe only 10 inches tall. Forms a really nice mound. It is an evergreen, which is really unique among perennials. So basically will stay green all winter. In the fall and winter, it gets this really nice burgundy tone to it. So you can kind of see some of these leaves here still have some of that winter color. So this is actually last year's foliage down around the bottom. And you can see this is actually some new growth here. So new growth is nice and green because it's from this year, but last year's growth has that really nice burgundy tinge to it. So cool plant, stays, like I said, stays green all winter long, which is a really nice addition to the landscape. It's a wonderful border plant because when the flowers are done, you only have about 6 or 8 inches of foliage left. You've got these beautiful pink flowers in the spring, and then just the foliage the rest of the year. I love hostas. There's some old-fashioned hostas that honestly are very boring, and sometimes when I recommend hostas to people, they just say, you know, I'm kind of done with hostas, or I've got a ton of hostas already, you know, that type of thing. And part of that is because a lot of people have inherited hostas from friends, neighbors, you know, your aunt, your grandma, whatever, and you have some of those old basic varieties. But I could probably do an entire video just called Not Your Grandma's Hostas or something, and maybe I will. But I brought up 2 really cool plants. This one, this is a new introduction from Proven Winners, rather. It is called Hope Springs Eternal. And this is a fairly large hosta. It's going to get about 20 to 25 inches tall. It's going to get about 36 to 40 inches wide. So really nice, very large mounding hosta. It has a couple of nice features about it. It's slug resistant. It is got a very nice, thick, ruffled leaf. So you can kind of see the edge of the leaf, that profile, this sort of undulation along there, which is really pretty. It has the nice two-tone between the green and the cream margins, but then what may not show up all that great on the camera is that even in the green, there's 2 different colors. So there's kind of this normal green, and then there's more of a lighter bluey green that almost looks like someone just went throughout the leaf and painted different brush strokes into the leaf. So this is a really cool one. It is for shade to part shade. People always ask me about what the best hostas are for sun. And while some of them might do okay in the sun, hostas do not love full sun. So I just tell people, if you've got a full sun location, there's great full sun plants. So don't try to put a square peg into a round hole. But wonderful, wonderful hosta there, Hope Springs Eternal. And then this one right here is a really cool variety. This is called Silly String. This is a really unique hosta. It only gets about 12 to 18 inches wide, maybe 6 to 8 inches tall. So not a very large plant, very diminutive in the landscape. You might be familiar with a variety called Curly Fries, which looks very similar to this, but with a limey green leaf. But Silly String has that very narrow, again, ruffled foliage, but with a really nice powdery blue color to it. Very neat plant. This one actually I've been trying to get for several years. We finally were able to get our hands on some, and I'm actually excited to add this one to my own landscape this year. So that one's called Silly String. Another good shade plant that I have talked about before on this program when I've talked about natives and some of our early blooming plant material. But I brought this up because it's a really fun plant and they're in full bloom right now. This is a wild stonecrop, also known as Sedum ternatum. It's our only native sedum here. It is a ground cover. It loves shade and part sun, and is great in rock gardens, in between larger plants, shrubs, things like that. So if you're looking for an alternative to the more invasive ground covers, Sedum ternatum is a great one. It is one of our first blooming plants in the landscape, so it's a great thing for some of the early forage for early pollinators. So that's Sedum ternatum. It only gets about 3 to 4 inches tall, spreads out really nicely, not overly aggressive, but definitely will kind of creep along the ground and root in here and there. Works great in cracks and crevices, retaining walls, ponds, rock gardens, all that kind of stuff. So kind of a cool one. While we're talking about native plants, here's a couple of other natives. Not necessarily, well, this is Spigelia. This is called Little Redhead. And this plant is native to southern Illinois, not so much here, although it does very well here, and is another great, great hummingbird plant. So this plant grows about 18 inches tall. It spreads a little, but not much. It's very well maintained, well mannered plant. It will bloom basically all spring and most of the summer, especially if you pick off the flowers that have dried off. So if you sort of deadhead it, it'll continually bloom for quite some time. And it is a plant that is cross-pollinated by hummingbirds. So great plant for them. It definitely has that both the color that hummingbirds like, that nice bright red, as well as that tubular flower that's filled with nectar. So great plant for them. This is a part sun to mostly shade plant. It is a woodland kind of bottomland plant, so not something that I would recommend for like that hot, dry location. I believe the tag actually says full sun. It does say full sun to part shade. I disagree with that, at least here in northern Illinois, where the sun can get pretty intense. I would not put this in a full hot sun location, you know, a dry end of the driveway or up on a berm or somewhere where it's really intense and hot and dry. I don't believe this would be a great location for that. It loves to grow in and amongst other plant material, underneath trees. It can take a decent amount of sun, but definitely does not want to just absolutely bake out there. But very cool plant. I've got some at home in a partially shaded location where it gets filtered sun in the morning from a large tree for about an hour or two. It gets direct midday sun, but then it gets filtered light and shade the rest of the day from another large oak tree. So it's done exceptionally well in that. So which is kind of a tough location because some shade plants don't love those couple of hours of direct sunlight, but this can tolerate that sunlight as well as shade the rest of the day and still blooms well. Then we've got Drummond pink phlox. This is a Phlox subulata, or a moss phlox. Only gets about 4 inches tall. Creeps on the ground, can get 12 or 18 inches wide. Another great rock garden plant, or if you've got a retaining wall, boulder wall, something like that, this is wonderful to plant along the front edge of that and just let it sort of creep and crawl right over the rocks. Has these big, beautiful kind of star-shaped pink flowers. Great little plant. There's a bunch of moss phloxes out there that we carry, blues and pinks and whites, but very cool. And Drummond pink is one of my favorites. It's very reliable. It also has a larger flower than a lot of the varieties that are on the market. So I like that one a lot. And then completely switching gears, this is a Neopia. One of the common names of the plant, which unfortunately isn't super fitting because it comes in other colors, as you can see here, but one of the common names for this plant is red hot poker. And the red variety, it kind of makes sense, but this particular one is called Hot and Cold, and it's just starting to bloom here. The bottom you can see is kind of a nice yellow, and the top is kind of more orangey. As the weather warms up and the plant develops a little more, the top is going to be kind of a bright pinky orange and the bottom is going to be yellow, and it sort of transitions down almost like an ombre type effect. Really cool plant. Loves the hot sun, loves it dry. It's got a very not quite succulent-like leaf, but it's a grassy-like leaf, but it almost reminiscent of like some of the narrow-leafed yuccas, rattlesnake master, some of those kind of things. It's got that, you know, sort of that texture to the leaf, but so definitely very sun and drought tolerant. And this one's called Hot and Cold. We've got a bunch of different varieties. There's the popsicle series, like mango popsicle. That's a really cool one. We've got some red ones, some yellow ones, and some orange ones. So lots to choose from there. I really like Neopia a lot. Not a huge plant, 24 to 36 inches tall, depending upon the variety. Some might be a little bit shorter, but 24 to 36 inches tall. Similar usage to like a daylily, but just a really cool flower. And another one that attracts all sorts of pollinators too, which is kind of cool. Got a handful more here. This is a geum right here called Tempo Yellow. There's a whole series of Tempo geum. Geum also go by the common name of avens, A-V-E-N-S. This particular one, Tempo Yellow, I really like the flower buds when they're first, when the plant is first sprouting in the springtime. You can kind of see here are like little red Christmas lights, little red ornaments almost on the plant. And so the back of the flower is red. And then when the flower opens up, it opens up to this really nice yellow flower. So it definitely gives it a very two-tone appearance, which is cool. The geum only get about 12 to maybe 16 inches tall, so not a very tall plant. One of the things that I like about geum is that the foliage looks great even when the plant is not in bloom. So earlier in the spring when it wasn't in bloom yet, the foliage looked great, and it's one of the earlier plants to come up in the garden. After the flowers have passed, you can trim those dead flower stalks off, and then the foliage maintains itself very well throughout the summer months. So really great border foreground type plant. Looks wonderful in mass, looks great all by itself. There are a bunch of colors available. The Tempo series, there's yellow, GM Tempo yellow, Tempo pink, and I think Tempo orange. There's a really cool variety that we have called Mai Tai, which is kind of yellow with orangey in there. And then I don't want to overlook the native one that we have here, the native GM, which is GM triflorum, which also goes by the name of Prairie Smoke. It has this very similar looking flower bud, but then when the flower opens up, it gets this really cool kind of weird, hairy, smoky looking flower. So great native plant. I was just looking at mine at home this morning. My GM triflorum are up. They're about 8 inches tall right now. They're loaded with flower buds, but none of the flowers are fully open yet. And but the plant's doing great. They look amazing. So you might want to check those out. It's a great addition to your landscape. I brought this one up because it's one of the plants that we have here in the landscape that I get the most questions about. Probably should just put a little sign out there to tell people what it is, but it's right outside our front door. It's a coral bell. This particular one is called Carnival Watermelon, and we have some planted right here in the landscape, and they just look great year-round. It's another very strange plant in that it is mostly an evergreen. It keeps this coloring all winter long. The stems are also very pretty, which is unique as well. So it's got these really unique pink stems in there. So pink stems with kind of a pinky, orangey, I don't know what else you'd call it, coloring in here, but very lovely plant. This is a very hardy coral bell. My experience with coral bells has been mixed. I've tried a lot of them. I've had pretty good luck with some of them, but one thing that has happened with some varieties is that they just sort of peter out, or they just don't have a very aggressive root system, and sometimes in the winter they just kind of heave up right out of the ground. I've also just had some that are just kind of weak. This is a very robust coral bell. It holds up great. I've had really, really good luck with this. I have some at home in my landscape. We have some here at the garden center, as I mentioned, and does very well. It will get a little flower stalk through here with like a little whitish flower on it, which is very nice as well, but it's mostly used for its foliage color, which also has these kind of silvery windows on there. I don't know how well that shows up on the camera, but very cool plant. Another border plant. It's going to be in the 12 by 12 size range. So, 12 inches tall, maybe 12 or 16 inches wide, mounded, really easy to grow. All right, I brought up just a couple of other ones. This is a plant you might not be familiar with. It is one that we've carried for a long time, and for whatever reason, the plant sort of fell out of favor, and I wasn't able to find what we call liners, which are the baby plants that we will plant, or even just finished plants that we could sell. And but I was able to find some a couple years back, and have kind of added it back into our repertoire. This is a Kerria called Golden Guinea. So the Japanese Kerria has these little yellow buttercup flowers. This particular variety anyway has a single flower. There's a more common variety that gets much larger that has a double flower. And by double, I mean it's got multiple layers of petals rather than a single layer. I actually don't like the plant the pleniflora, which is the double flowering variety. It gets much larger. It's more of a golden yellow, and it's just not as, I think, not as attractive of a plant. But Golden Guinea has this nice buttercup type flower. It has green stems, which is very cool. So even in the wintertime, the stems are green, which gives it a nice winter effect. This plant was cut back at the end of the year, but the growth habit is very fountainy, so it kind of grows out like this. It also tolerates being planted in dry shade, which is something that not all plants can boast. Dry shade is a tough, kind of a tough customer, and this will tolerate it. It tolerates the black walnut. It tolerates the dry shade. It also tolerates deer and rabbits very, very well. There are, it's got some what are called alkaloids in there that are just, kind of a chemical compound that plants produce to make them not very favorable to mammals in particular. So cool plant, loves that dry shade, that tough growing environment, fountain-like habit, mostly sun to mostly shade, so very versatile plant. And with the cool green arching stems and fountain-like habit, it offers a really unique texture to the landscape. It tolerates those difficult locations, and maybe a cool plant to add to the landscape if you're looking for something for one of those conditions. So I wanted to bring up this plant here. I couldn't walk past the Baptisias without bringing one of these up. This particular one is called Lemon Meringue, and I love the bright yellow flowers with the darker kind of purpley buds, giving it this almost, luminary effect. It almost looks like it's lit up. It's very cool. This is it's a perennial plant, so it dies to the ground, but it's almost a small shrub. Very dense, mounded plant, gets about 30 to 36 inches tall and wide, very dense and shrubby. We've got these beautiful 2-gallon sized plants here. These are already 3 years old. So they're, really robust plant, healthy root system, lots of stems, ready to make a big impact in your landscape. These are a full sun plant. It's a relative of our native false indigo and is a member of the legume family. Very cool plant. We've got them in a bunch of different colors, yellows, blues, some kind of almost orangey colored ones. So very cool plant. I really like those a lot. I like the blue ones too. All right, last but certainly not least is, might be a couple weeks late to the party, but we had these a couple weeks ago too. But you may have seen this on our Facebook page. You might have seen it online. This is a hydrangea called Eclipse. This we were kind of promoting during the eclipse a couple weeks back, and we had a little promo going, and we sold out of them, and we have more. Our next crop is ready, and so we've got these available. This is the first to market burgundy leafed hydrangea. So it's got these beautiful dark burgundy, almost blackish really when they get a lot of sun. So that foliage is really nice and dark. And then it's got this really cool two-tone red and green flower. It is a macrophylla hydrangea, which means that it's going to have a little harder time reblooming in your landscape at home. So it would like some winter protection. So winter protection can be one of a couple things. You can mound some mulch around the base of the stems. That is helpful. We don't recommend pruning these in the fall at all, so you want to leave the entire stem intact. If you trim off the flowers or trim the stems back a bit, you create sort of a hollow opening for cold to get deeper into the stem and cause more winter damage. So leave the plant intact throughout the winter months, and then just trim it back to wherever you see healthy green growth, or in this case, burgundy growth, I guess, but wherever you see healthy green growth in the springtime. It blooms on old and new wood, so it is a remontant hydrangea, and will rebloom kind of throughout the summer months. So you've got the benefit of that really cool black burgundy foliage during the summer when the plant may not be in bloom, and then once it starts blooming, you have kind of the best of both worlds. So cool plant, and this is one that would like mostly sun to partial shade. So if it gets too much shade, you're not going to get much flowering. You're not going to get that really cool burgundy color. If it is crazy, crazy hot, you might find that the plant wilts a lot. One tip that I can tell you about these types of hydrangeas is they oftentimes will wilt in the middle of the day when the sun is at its peak and when it is very, very hot out. And so the leaves will just wilt like this. That does not necessarily mean that the plant needs water. It's the way that the plant cools itself off. And so what I recommend with these is if the leaves are wilty during the day, let it go. If they're still wilty in the morning or in the late in the evening after the sun is down and the temperatures have cooled off, then give it some water. But that's a really good way to know whether it's just hot or whether it's actually dehydrated. But the Eclipse Hydrangea from First Editions, very cool plant, very excited about it. I'm thinking about adding one of these to the landscape, even though I swore off Macrophylla hydrangeas a couple years back, and now here I am thinking about planting another one again. So I don't know, we'll see. But I really like these, the coloring a lot. So I might add that to the landscape. Who knows? We have, as I mentioned at the start of the video, we have an absolutely fantastic selection of plant material. The weather forecast looks really great for planting. We got right around a ½ inch of rain yesterday afternoon, which is awesome. Really just kind of softened that ground up, made it perfect for working conditions, for planting. Great for getting the garden prepared. If you're going to do a little tilling or work some compost into the soil, that bit of rain that we got yesterday is going to just soften things up nicely and really help out a lot. So the conditions are great. The weather forecast is great. The plant selection is great. So I hope that we'll see you here this weekend, and I hope that you get a chance to get outside. So thanks for being with me for another episode of Coffee Chat.